And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever.
In one startling prophecy, God had outlined the course of world events for thousands of years into the future. During the next few years, God continued to give Daniel details of the 4 great empires that would dominate history. After a startling dream, Daniel awoke to write down the frightening revelation.
I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear. It was raised up on one side, and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns.
Daniel laid a foundation, but he was not given full understanding. That would not come until many centuries had passed, and the world was in the tumultuous age spoken of in prophecy as the time of the end. When that time came, God would raise up another servant who would take a message to all the world, a world on the brink of destruction.
And God has sent me to the kings and to the tops of nations even. And this gospel of the kingdom is going to all the world. Now what is going to happen? The hydrogen bomb has come. And you will read back in Ezekiel, the 6th chapter, that all of the great cities are going to be leveled and destroyed. I'm telling you that a time more terrifying than anything that ever happened is soon going to happen in this world. It's time we wake up. It's time we get our eyes open. We have lost God. We have forgotten God. And God is going to step in. Satan is ruling this dark world, and it's an unhappy world. And God has sent me to preach this gospel. The other ministers, the other churches are not preaching that gospel of Jesus Christ. They preach about Christ, but they don't preach his message. They preach about the messenger, but they don't preach the messenger's message. They ask Christ, what will be the end of the world? The end of the world is when this gospel of the kingdom is preached, and you are seeing it. You're seeing me here, I'm preaching it.
This work that has grown into international scope began in 1934. The 30s were difficult times. The United States and Europe were in the grip of the Great Depression. In Germany, a madman had begun to lead his nation down the road to ruin. In 1934, although most did not recognize it, the world was entering the time of the end. Far from the center of turmoil, in the quiet Willamette Valley of western Oregon, God was leading Herbert W. Armstrong to understand the significance of these times. In his autobiography, Mr. Armstrong tells how his eyes were opened to see that the prophecies of the Bible had an urgent message for the modern world. Herbert W. Armstrong was being prepared for a vitally important mission. When God uses human instruments to do his work, things start small. To begin with, there was just Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong and a group of humble co-workers. But God was beginning to lay the foundation for a powerful last witness to the nations of the world. Using the experience gained in business, Mr. Armstrong organized the work into a three-point plan: a weekly radio program, a monthly magazine, and a continuing series of personal lectures and campaigns. The World Tomorrow grew from one program on a 100-watt station to a radio and television program that is now heard and seen on hundreds of stations around the world. From an even humbler beginning, the plain truth has steadily increased in quality and circulation until today it reaches into nearly every country on earth in many languages with a readership of millions. The third part of the three-point plan also began small. Mr. Armstrong held meetings in rented halls in the towns and villages of the Willamette Valley. As the work grew, he planned campaigns in other parts of the United States and eventually overseas. But God had even bigger plans for this part of the three-point plan. The turning point came in 1968. As the world moved closer to its date with destiny, God thrust his servant into the international arena. Like so many other major advances in God's work, it began with a series of apparent coincidences.
It will be 20 years this year that we have been associated with Herr and Frau Hennig. We got to know them years ago at Bonn because of a visit of Mr. Manescu, who was the foreign minister of Romania. And something very interesting developed later, and maybe Frau Hennig would like to tell us that story.
Yes, we were looking for a particular camera. I don't quite remember which type, but in any case it wasn't available in Germany, and Mr. Schnee pointed out that maybe in Belgium or America. Anyway, we drove to Belgium because we had an acquaintance there who has a wholesale camera business, and we asked him, and he told us that he thought he could get this camera for us. Both we and Mr. Schnee wanted one. And then we stayed on a while until we were able to get a camera. And Herr Roland invited us to join him for a cup of coffee in his private apartment upstairs. Upon that occasion, something very special happened. Maybe you would like to tell that, Mr. Schnee.
Yes. Herr Roland, during this visit, handed me a stack of photographs. And I was looking at these photographs, and as coincidence would have it, just before this, Dr. Hay had given me the job of looking for color pictures because the Plain Truth magazine had just gone to full color, and we were desperate to get all kinds of color pictures. So I thought, well, these pictures would be wonderful. There were so many really good shots from all over the world, and I said to Herr Roland when he came back into the room, we would certainly like to buy some of these pictures for our magazines. And he sort of smiled knowingly and shook his head. He said, no, he said, you won't be able to buy these pictures. And I said, well, why not? He said, well, these were taken by King Leopold of Belgium. And he said, one thing, a king could not get involved in a commercial venture. But secondly, he said, anyway, he uses all of his photos for his own publications. And I remember saying, well, I still mean what I say. We could use these pictures for our publications. And I had almost forgotten about the incident when about a week or 10 days later, suddenly the telephone rang. And Herr Roland was on the other side, quite excited.